Hello, everyone. Just give us 1 second as we get started. All right, I think we can probably kick it off. So, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this wonderful Wednesday. Today, our speaker is Chris Wickett. She is a enterprise agile coach and a general manager of modern delivery services with Improving in Minnesota. Chris has had years of hands-on experience leading a large corporation's agile transformation. This involved leading a team of agile coaches and trainers and coaching executive leaders on lean agile values and principles. All of this promoted an environment of continuous learning, improvement, and servant leadership for business and IT agility. She has an experience with implementing and managing teams to support lean portfolio management at scale, in addition to product management. Chris is a dog lover, big sports fan, and an avid water skier and snowmobiler. That sounds awesome. Living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, Chris gets to enjoy the outdoors during all 4 seasons. And before I hand the mic over to you, Chris, I just want to let you guys, our viewers, know that this is going to be a very interactive session. So please, if you have any questions at any point, you can throw them in the chat in the Q&A, and Chris will be happy to answer them. All right, Chris, thank you so much, and take it away.
Great, thank you. Let me first start by trying to share my screen and make sure I get that right. Are we good with sharing the screen?
Yes, it is perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, great. Thanks, Jordan, for the intro and everything. And as he mentioned, please don't be shy on interrupting, asking questions along the way, getting clarification. This is all about my passion, if you will, and you'll see that on behalf of what I do and why. So this is, again, all about the pieces of the puzzle. So the presentation is going to have a lot of different pictures to try and tie different concepts and so on together. So bear with me as we take a look at our journey of different perspectives. So with that, as Jordan mentioned, I am in Minneapolis. And I will be with Improving actually April 1st will be my 4-year anniversary. And as he mentioned prior to that, I was at a large corporation for 31 years and grew up there. So I have a lot of experience of the different types of culture. But we were very, little did I know, we were very progressive at the time of leading an agile transformation. And as we all know, it's a journey. There's not really a final destination. And for me, that's the fun part. I'm very passionate about solving business problems and opportunities. I grew up in the business, but then I moved over halfway through my career into IT. And so really having that opportunity to take a look at the business world and IT and solving those problems and figuring out different opportunities really is what gives me energy. And with that, that's where another part of my energy comes from is I am a Gallup certified strength coach. And what I like about that, Improving is really huge in that space, which is fun to see. We always are taking a look at what our strengths are. And my number one strength, which won't surprise you of why this topic is near and dear to my heart, is I am an arranger. And what that means is that it's all about figuring out the different bits and pieces of how do we arrange them and rearrange them to get that maximum value, maximum productivity. So I'm constantly thinking about different ways of doing things, which is the good news, but it also can drive people crazy. And so that's why, again, being mindful of our strengths and taking advantage of that and having that common language for when folks may not see different ways of doing things, that's what gives me energy. So as you can see by the characteristics, it's all about multi-thinking. Now controlling is an interesting one, but it is trying to figure out what's the best way to do things, but being flexible with that. And that's a really important part and leading into the different pieces of the puzzle. That's why lean portfolio management for me has always been that, that next piece of such an important component into it. Because as we all know, Agile is not the end of the journey, as I mentioned. It's just really the beginning. And our goal is to trying to figure out how can we look at things holistically? How can we generate, if you will, that frictionless and incremental, risk-free, and really focus on the financials. That again, growing up in a large corporation, we were always wanting to figure out how much does this cost and this kind of thing. And so where a lot of frameworks are silent in that, and I am agnostic on frameworks, but I like to take bits and pieces of frameworks to make it work. And so that's what we're going to go through, are quite a few different perspectives, and understanding that, some frameworks bring in more of this lean portfolio management than others. I will be excited when other frameworks jump in and help out with that, because again, being an adapter or an arranger, I like to take, what works here, what works there, and put it together. So with that, that's what this whole thing is all about. What is that next piece of the puzzle? Because it's not a matter of if you need lean portfolio management, it's when. So let's take a look at what it really is. And this is an interesting thing. We always are doing portfolio management, but it's the highest decision-making and financial accountability for solutions and development. And that's inclusive of operations and everything. And so that's why, again, when we are in the situation of the puzzles coming together, the puzzle pieces coming together, that financial piece is critical. So if we take a look at breaking down lean portfolio management, it really helps to simplify and demystify what we're trying to do. So in lean, as we know, it's all about tips and techniques for removing waste from operations. Came from the manufacturing and so on. And so we're constantly looking at what can we remove and keep things lean and mean and keep that flow of information. The same applies then too when we look at the organization. And we want to be super fussy about what we're investing in and the value that we're delivering. And that's why it's called lean portfolio management, because we are weeding out the waste and being super, super fussy with our investments of our time and our people, and making sure we're working on the right thing at the right time and building it correctly. So that's the whole thing on that puzzle piece of why this is important. So just like we have our own portfolios for our home, if you will, and our investments, we have portfolios in our business. It's a collection of assets. You can call them value streams, products, call them whatever you want. It's everything that we are looking at on behalf of our business domain in an enterprise. So that's why we want to make sure that when we're talking about lean portfolio management, it fits into that bigger picture. And that's what we're going to continue to go through of what that looks like. Then management is the same definition that we've had before. What is it that we need to do? The knowledge, the skills, those tools and techniques to deliver that value to people, whomever that is. And so we put all of that together, and that's what we're looking at when we talk about that next piece of the puzzle, that lean portfolio management. So with that, I want to come at this another way of a different perspectives, because as I mentioned, we've got a lot of different dimensions that we want to put together and figure out what is the most efficient and effective way to manage our assets, to track the financials, and make sure that we're getting the value that we set up for. Systems thinking. If I could do anything different, now again, I'm always a work in progress. So, but if I could do anything about the journey, and it's not that I didn't have people saying things about systems thinking and so on, but I would bring that into my journey sooner. And that's why I want to share it with you guys. For those that might be just starting your journey, or you're in, continuous learning. Systems thinking is all about what that scalability is. What is the whole system, that whole organization? So a system can be a portfolio, it can be the organization, but it's bigger thinking, and that's what we need for scalability. And again, having grown up in a very large corporation, we always had to think about scalability. We also had to think about sustainability, and that's where lean comes in. And it's really critical, as we mentioned before in the definition, of what are we weeding out, and especially if we're adding new things in with the Agile and so on, we want to make sure that we're removing anything that is causing friction or adding waste for our flow. So again, systems thinking is really an important part of it. And that's why with lean portfolio management, we are looking at the greater picture and then focusing in at different levels. which then, as we all know, Agile gets into the picture too, because that helps us with flexibility. We can pivot, we can persevere, but we do it in a disciplined manner. And that's the really important thing, is that we don't just change willy-nilly. We want to make sure we're changing for the right reasons, and we've got that discipline and that cadence. So that again is what we call the system level. And as I mentioned, this is the key with lean portfolio management. We need to take a look at it from all of these different perspectives, because then we get down to that team or local level. And this is where we start to bring in some of the other frameworks too, such as Scrum, that can help us with predictability, Kanban, which helps us with flow. And you'll see with Kanban, that moves out into that lean space, if you will, and Agile. And this is where we bring in Kanban into our portfolio. We have a Kanban portfolio board, and that's where we want to make sure that we're really managing our WIP, we're managing all of the things that we have going on. So this is, again, one of the perspectives that can really help us to think, where does lean portfolio fit in and why do we do what we do? So don't be shy, you guys. If you have questions, comments, just shout them out, or you can put them in the chat. So what happens with lean portfolio management? And again, I'm taking some of this out from Scaled Agile Framework, SAFe. They are ones that are pretty progressive in this space. Again, as I mentioned, I'll be excited for more frameworks to get have some input into lean portfolio management. But it's at this point that we're connecting that strategy and execution by applying our lean thinking and systems thinking. And so that's where we are taking a look at the three different dimensions and how these pieces fit together. We have to have all three in order to really take a look at it from that system perspective. When we take a look at that first chunk, we've got strategy and investment funding. This is truly where we start to invest and we figure out, what are we going to fund? How are we going to fund it? And how do we maintain those solutions? We need to be mindful of our business targets. We're super fussy on prioritization. You'll hear me say fussy a lot, because that is the spirit of lean. Making sure that we are working on things at the right time. What's interesting when we start to really look at our prioritization and a lot of the organizations is we reward folks for starting things more than we reward them for stopping or finishing things. And that is the one thing inside lean portfolio management. We are wanting to manage our WIP, our work in progress. So when we have a new idea or we have a new project or initiative that we want to start, we need to look around and ask, what in our system has either stopped or completed so that we have the capacity to take this on. We want to make sure that we're embracing, if you will, persistent teams. We get to ask then, how much work can this group of people get done? And the work comes to the team. And that assists us with capacity and demand, balancing that and so on. So the strategy and investment funding is a critical part to that bigger picture. Just like that is an important part, we also have to manage our operations. We have to make sure that what we've got out there is working, that inspect and adapt. We are enabling that operational excellence. Again, going back to lean, we're taking a look, where do we have gaps in our flow? A lot of times we have self-inflicted constraints, if you will. And so as we look at the organization and we look at the whole system, we start to take a look to see, where are those constraints, where are opportunities that we can really free up our operations and enable that excellence. And then last but not least, we all have to have governance, but the word here of lean is critical. We want to keep it super simple. We want to manage our spending. We need to have the audits and the compliance. We also have to do forecasting. Measurement, yes, we do measure in Agile and so on. In fact, back when I first started, that's how long I've been in this space, it was more that peace, love, and Agile, and we just deliver, and we just, we don't have deadlines, and we don't have to do those kind of things. And that was a hard sell at a very large legacy company. And so that's why, again, we needed to figure out, what can we put in place to keep that Agile mindset, to keep us lean and mean. And that's where it was such a breath of fresh air to see the lean portfolio management piece fitting into that puzzle. So these are the three components that we call under the umbrella of lean portfolio management.
Hey, Chris,
sure, yeah.
we do have one question that did pop in. As companies differ greatly between each company, do you see any do you see any common areas where these operations can be more lean between companies? Companies are very big, yeah, and they can differ a lot, but maybe there's some
Yeah.
common areas you look for.
Yeah, I would definitely, anytime we have operations, we should make sure we understand what we're doing and what are the outcomes that we're going for. Operations is a really important part to ensure that we're getting the benefits that we're going after, and really focusing on how can we continue to evolve the maturity in operations. Again, having grown up in operations, there were many times that we would have standard operating procedures and people would just do things because that was the way it was supposed to be done. When we add lean to it, we want to ask, is this adding the value? And actually with Agile and so on. So if I understand the question correctly, anytime we are working in this space of operations, CapEx, OpEx, all of that, we should be looking at it with that lens to see, are we getting the value and the outcomes that we're going for? And from my experience in operations, that's a continuous journey for making sure that we are getting that flow of information, that flow of outcome, so that we are getting the benefits that we're going for. Does that seem to answer the question?
Yeah, that makes sense. So for me, basically that means just ask questions, try to understand why these processes are there. Maybe they've been there too long, or they're outdated or something like that. So you just gotta look at that with that lens, right?
Exactly. One of the famous things, no matter what size of company, I would say, is we've always done it that way. And so I remember when I was first starting out, anytime that I heard that, I'm like, oh no, here we go. And so it was, instead of judging, we want to look at it from curiosity and start to ask the 5 whys. Why do we do it this way? And that kind of thing. And why is that? Why is that? Because again, sometimes we have habits that are hard to break, but it's not always that they have to change. We just want to really walk through and make sure that we're doing it the best that we can at all times.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So if those are the 3 components of lean portfolio management, then how does it all fit together? Most of the time when we're in this agile space, if you will, we're talking about product and team. And this is where all the puzzle pieces start to fit together. So what we're going to go through here is just using examples of different tools and techniques where your mileage may vary. And again, one of the cool things in this space is that the different tools and techniques, they change. And that's where we want to make sure that we're keeping up with the industry. What's that next big thing coming out and so on. So from the portfolio perspective, as we already talked about, we have strategies, we have our investments, we are managing our operations, and we're looking at those business outcomes. What are we trying to accomplish? We then feed those down to the products. And this objectives and key results, OKRs, they've been the hot thing for the last couple of years. And I'm sure they'll continue to be the hot thing. Super, super simple. And what I love about OKRs is the sophistication that they bring with simplicity. We want to know, what are we trying to accomplish and how will we measure it? So if we want to create an awesome customer experience, that's pretty nebulous, but that is an objective. It's through those key results of how can we measure that to know that we're on track or off track. So that's where, again, we want to always be paying attention to all the different tools, techniques, different ways of doing things, try different things and so on. But we're feeding from the portfolio to the product and then feeding to the teams. And it's at this point then that in this example, we're choosing the currency of features to then assist us in delivering that value back to the customer. I like the currency of features because that is that common language between business and IT and the customer. Being a recipient of products, if you will, for example, on our phone, we have new features or functions, if you will, but the currency of features is more common. So I always like to try and empathize from how we are consumers with our products and services that we use and how we bring that into our organizations and to the clients that we assist. So in this example, we're breaking those features down into what we call epics, and then we refine those to epics and user stories in our sprints. Then we start that bi-directional feedback back up to the portfolio. We're continuously improving that flow of delivery. Quality is always, always, always built into that. That is a big part of Lean. We're recalibrating based on the metrics. We want to embrace the data, really taking advantage of what are the customers, what's the feedback, what are the features and functions that they're using. If they're trying something and we thought it was the best thing since sliced bread and they're not using it, we want to embrace that objectively. Because again, that would be considered waste if we have things out there that are not being used, and perhaps we could do something different or tweak it a little bit to get that value. And then we feed it right back up to that portfolio to, again, we're improving that flow of value. We want to obtain our business targets and that portfolio operations. So it is that continuous lather, rinse, repeat going around and around. So that, again, is how we have all the puzzle pieces fitting together. Looks really easy, doesn't it? And it can be. And that's why I really want to stress the opportunities of looking at it from that Agile and Lean viewpoint.
Hey, Chris,
All right.
I actually had a personal question on this chart. I love how, Agile really flows into this, iterate, adjust, and kind of pivot as needed. I find OKRs really helpful personally for myself and the projects that I work on. So my question for you is, do you have any kind of strategies around these OKRs? How often are you adjusting them? Do you have them for a certain period of time before you really try to read the data from them? Anything around that?
Yeah, one thing, thanks for asking that, because this is definitely an area to continue to inspect and adapt. My first piece of advice is to keep them super simple. We want to have an objective and maybe 3 key results. And from an organization perspective, maybe have 3 or 4 objectives. And under each objective, like I say, 3 or 4 key results. Super, super simple. What we can do and what we've been practicing is that you do it at an annual level, if you will, of creating those, but then chunk them up by quarter. I'm a huge fan of quarterly objectives and key results. You still have your annual ones, and they can be kind of the same, but be maybe more targeted quarter by quarter. And then get into the habit and the cadence of quarterly planning, so that when, like, with March wrapping up 1Q, what did we learn from that? Even just the objectives and key results, did we make them more complicated than we needed to? We also have the lagging indicators and leading indicators that we need to pay attention to, because that, again, to your point on reading the data, will assist us in those strategies. Wherever possible, we want to have leading indicators, meaning it is giving us a heads up of how things are working. Lagging indicators actually are more common. And so that, again, as you're going through and doing quarterly planning, if you will, pay attention to those lagging indicators. And it's, if nothing else, just start there, because that's, I think, the most important thing is just get started and then inspect and adapt. So I would suggest that you do them quarterly. Then we also can look at them monthly inside that quarter to see how are we doing. One of the big things too is when you get started is just collecting the data can be interesting and a little bit challenging. And that's why you want to keep it super simple and always ask, how can we measure that? If we're finding out it's too hard to measure, my opinion is change it. Because what we don't want to do is just get rid of not tracking it because it's too hard. Having been raised in that world a little bit in our culture that we had all this data, it actually became overwhelming, and we sometimes had more data than we could consume. So then we really didn't pay attention to it. So I like simplicity, doing it quarter by quarter, month by month, and inspecting and adapting.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful, actually. We do have one question coming in as they're typing it out. Feel free to continue, and I'll let you know once that's ready.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So here again is just a picture of all of the roles that we have in our system playing and working together. It is not intended to show hierarchy. It is intended to show how things cascade from one level to another. So again, we have at the portfolio level. This is again having us look at the whole system, and these are examples of roles that need to be paying attention at that portfolio level. We have that business backlog in which we're very fussy about what work we're investing in. We want to make sure then that we're feeding that to the products. And that's where we then have, here are OKRs again, that feed back to those strategic initiatives. And then we are continuing to decompose that work into the teams and again, using the example of features. And we have user stories or whatever way that we're capturing that information. And this is where we have the opportunity to spread it out to many, many teams. So that parent-child relationship really can assist us with that simplicity. But these are all the roles in the system that we need to be paying attention to. And again, you can tell by the arrows, it's that bi-directional feedback from portfolio to product to team, and again, corporate objectives and getting that feedback from the customer. So the roles can vary, if you will, but we want to make sure that we've got all of the right players and the different portfolio, product, and team levels.
Great. That question actually did come through from Melissa. Are there any tips and tricks for getting leadership to try to measure for fear of failure if OKRs aren't achieved?
Yes. That is, again, that growth mindset, which I would say metrics are there to inspect and adapt. So what I always like to say is that they're written in pencil. Meaning, it doesn't mean that we're not going to measure and so on, but we don't know necessarily, and especially as I mentioned, as you get started, we think I have a saying, it looks good on paper. And so once you start measuring it though, we're like, ooh, that didn't quite work. So what we don't want to do is get frustrated with the metrics. We want to use those metrics to make data-driven decisions. So taking a look at the objectiveness of the data, we can always add that subjectivity, but become obsessed with the data so that we can make those decisions. So that way it neutralizes things. And that is what I've been found very helpful, is for folks to not think that they're written in permanent marker, and that if we don't hit a metric, that doesn't mean failure. That just means that it's not feasible. We're not getting the expected outcome that we wanted. So what do we need to do to inspect and adapt? When we're not hitting our metric, that's really good information, is just as much as we're hitting our metric, because we know that that didn't work. So what do we want to do? We want to try something else. So that's a really important part as we're going forward. From my experience, and again, I cut my teeth in traditional, all sorts of stuff. And we would sometimes get, have things written so much in permanent marker and saying it must do this, must do that. And so it wasn't until we kind of freed ourselves and came in with that lean mindset and that ability to be nimble and that inspect and adapt really helps to free it up. Now, that said, that mindset, we have to remap the way we work, and we didn't get here overnight, so it's not going to be a flip of a switch going forward. What we want to do though is work together and really help each other out of that new way of doing things, especially when it gets to be stressful situations. More times than not, we want to go back to the way we've always done work when it's stressful. And it's at that point where we don't want to do that. We really want to take a step forward with a new way of doing things so that we can reap the benefits that we're going after. But don't give up. Those are the things that we got to do. And that's why I keep it super simple and just get good at the simplicity of it, and it'll come. Which is a great segue into this one, that growth mindset. That is, again, one of the key things. And from a leader's perspective, we do want to embrace that lean thinking and our agile values and our growth mindset. And what is a growth mindset? It's always thinking about, I can try a different strategy. I can learn to do that. This might take more time. We want that over a fixed mindset. And that, again, is something that we might have to remap how we think. So when we look at lean portfolio management, It is all about lean thinking and agile values and principles working together. Again, as I mentioned before, lean comes from manufacturing. We're super fussy about that value. We call out the steps that we have in our processes. We then figure out what is that value that we're going for. How can we remove it? Again, back to the operations. How can we remove any interruptions or constraints that we have? And this is where we want the customer telling us, what do they like? We want to make sure we're getting their feedback. We may think that we have the best solution, but unless the customer is using it or buying it, then it's not the value's not there. And so that's why we want to, again, become obsessed with the process of that customer satisfaction. And that's where we go to step number 5 on lean thinking of pursuing perfection. It's through that bi-directional feedback, that data, and again, feasibility, and we're going to go through that. And if something doesn't work, neither one is right or wrong. It's just data for us to be able to make decisions. So I think that is the key thing for me as I continue my journey, is separating the objectiveness from the subjectiveness and really being mindful of that. Because then, as you can see on the Agile values, we want to have the individuals in interactions, we want working product, we want that customer collaboration, and we want to respond to change, but in that disciplined manner. So these two things working together is what lean portfolio management is all about. And that's why I call it the missing piece of the puzzle, because we sometimes forget about that. So this is again where we start to connect the dots of what do we want to work on next. When we look at our portfolio and product management competencies, this is again connecting that dot of execution to strategy. We have our corporate objectives. They're that North Star that we're going for. We then decompose that, as we've seen in the other ones, into strategic initiatives. We are assuming we want to solve a problem or go after an opportunity. So we call that a strategic initiative. We then, again, as we talked about, break that into business outcomes and key results, so that we have this is what success looks like. Here are my measurements. And then it's through collecting that data that we make sure that we're working on the right thing at the right time. And this is where we become obsessed with that customer experience, that customer journey. What are we looking at? That full interaction and being empathetic to our customer, whomever that might be. That's what we want to be, making sure that we're working on the right thing at the right time. So this is, again, how portfolio and product fit together. And then we bring it to the team to make that come to fruition. So being obsessed with that customer experience and that customer journey can assist us with that objectivity of what should we work on next. One of the things that one of my favorite quotes here is by Einstein. When we are talking about the problem space versus the solution space, he has a quote to say, given 1 hour to save the world, I would spend 55 minutes defining the problem and 5 minutes finding the solution. Why this is so important to me, again, throughout my journey, is most of the time we live in solution space. We live in the say, I know if we can do it this way, we can do it that way. And that is all solution. That's how we do something. Again, not uncommon that we live in that space, but where we want to be deliberate is understand there's a time and a place for solution, but we need to spend more time in the problem space. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? What is the problem that we're going after? What is that opportunity? Again, sometimes I might have to speak in solution or design to get people to concepts and so on, but then I need to be very deliberate and step back into the problem. What are we trying to do? How will we know if we've solved that? So this is, again, remapping how we do things. Many times our requirements come across as solutions. And that's where we want to work together to back up to say, well, what are we really trying to accomplish? What are your requirements that we need to accommodate? And that way, then we can move from that problem space into the solution space. So again, when we're working together with organizations and clients and teams, we want to have that same common vocabulary so that when we do have that solution conversation, we're like, whoa, wait a minute, we can go there for concept, but now we got to get back into that problem space. All right, so this is where we take advantage of what we call discovery and viability. These big bets. We want to invest in innovation so that we can take advantage of, are we working on the right thing at the right time? Testing and then getting that feedback. This again is where a lot of times we're in that solution space, but we need to back up and take a look at it from a different perspective. We want, whoops, let me see. Ooh, my screen froze. There we go. We want to take a hypothesis-driven approach, just like when we were in school and we had science experiments and so on. That's the same thing we want to do here. We have a hypothesis, for example. We have a hypothesis that people want to buy a purple pen. So then we need to figure out what is the best way for us to prove or disprove that they want a purple pen compared to a blue pen. And that is what we want to be doing at that portfolio to product level. This is where we want to really take advantage of mitigating some of those risks early so that before we go and invest all this time and money into these big bets, that we're making sure that the purple pen is what they want compared to the blue pen. So we make that the smallest experiment that we can to validate that. We have our value risk. Will the user buy it? Even if I produce the best purple pen, will they buy it? We want to validate that. Can they use it? Maybe if I'm selling a purple pen and they can't use it for anything, sure, I have a great purple pen, but no one's buying it. So then we have that risk that we want to mitigate. Can we build it? Do we have the capability of building that compared to the blue pen? Maybe it's something new and so on, which then brings us to that business viability. Will our stakeholders support it? This is where, and I am super fussy about what we call minimal viable product. MVP, the V stands for viability. It stands for small experiments against our big bets before we go and invest a lot of time and money into it. So the V in MVP has a different outcome. Viability is what we're looking for to see and mitigate these risks. Most of the time, organizations are doing what I call minimal marketable products, which are really good too, because it's smaller increments of value, but we are going to market with it. We'll still get that feedback, but the outcomes are different. We're not going for that viability, but we still are going to track to see, are they using it and so on. So for those who have worked with me and all of that before, you know that I will be super fussy on MVP being that small experiment, mitigate these risks and so on. Minimal marketable products, still we need to mitigate risk, collect data and so on, but our outcomes are very different. Either way, we want to have small experiments. We want to get that feedback and going back to those pictures of that bi-directional input and data. So that brings us to then, how does this all come together? Agile planning and funding and so on. How do we do this in the world that we're at? And I think that again is when we're at that portfolio to product, we want to create that smallest chunk of value, whether it be for the viability or for marketability. How can we do that? This is a picture that I use all the time. My mind thinks like this constantly, putting all these pieces together to deliver that value. So if we were going to be doing annual funding, if you will, or even annual planning, which is our reality in most cases, we want to embrace some of those constraints because we want to make sure that we are able to have the frameworks work in our environment and our culture and so on. As we continue on the journey and get more and more mature together as a system and an organization, we can shorten our planning horizon, shorten our budgeting and so on. But we want to get good at it first, at least quarterly. So yes, I do recommend imposing quarterly time boxes. So if we have our business value, our vision of what we're trying to accomplish, we then know also how we're going to measure it. We want to chunk it up into a roadmap. And this is again, by intent, imposing quarterly time boxing. Shrink that planning horizon as to the smallest that you can, but at least from my experience, start out quarterly, and then inside each quarter, we have sprints. And that's where we then start to bring out, if you will, the different features, functions, quarter by quarter. And what you can see with these dotted lines is that even at the end of the quarter, such as March is ending 1Q, as I mentioned, we need to be looking at what is the world, what has happened since the last time we were kind of working through this. We're still managing things on a monthly and sprint by sprint basis, but we also then need to see, do we need to change direction? We want to impose smaller batches, lack of a better word, or chunks, so that we can pivot or persevere, because it's not a matter of if things change, it's when. So then we continue to go along from one quarter, and a release in Agile means a time box. It can also mean you release to production, but I call that deploy. So the word release can mean two things. So it can be quarterly planning, release planning in 3-month chunks as a starting point. Then again, we continue on, and that we have that 4-month vision, if you will. Now, at any point that we're finding that we have invested enough time and energy and we've received enough value from this vision, we want to then move on to that next thing. And so that's where I mentioned earlier, when we have that portfolio Kanban board and it's loaded with a lot of ideas, we want them into smaller chunks so that by quarter, we have completed something, so that if I want to introduce something into the system, we have capacity to take that on. So that is, again, part of that flow and that Kanban and managing our WIP. We do that at the initiative level, and we do that at the product level too. The cool thing about this framework here is it's scalable, because this can be, like I say, you can use this framework at the portfolio level, that all these different bars are initiatives. You can use this at the product level, that all the bars are features, or you can use it at the team level, that they're features and or epics or whatever you want to do. But our goal is to get them into smaller planning horizons, and we can also budget this way too. By having persistent teams, we know our burn rate, we know our time box, so we can get our financials pretty rock solid for what our cost is going to be. So then we want to focus on what's that value and so on. Any questions when I talk about this one? Because this one can be a big one.
No questions have come up in the chat quite yet. As our audience has time to type them out. Actually, we did have one come in. I'm sorry, I just missed it. It is from Rico. What is the ideal balance between new innovation initiatives and maintaining existing products and services?
That is a great one, because we would want to, perfect world, it would be 70% CapEx and 30% OpEx, which would be running the business. I would even say 60-40 would be a good thing to strive for. Most organizations have those reversed. They're putting more into running the business or keeping the lights on than into their capital and new features and functions. So we want to track that, and we want to put more into the capital and less into the operating. Because again, if we're getting that feedback and delighting our customers and giving them new features and functions, we want to do that. And that's why we want to make sure that we're building that quality in, so we don't have tech debt and so on. So 60 to 70% on the new, and 30 to 40% on the OpEx. But definitely tracking it and just knowing where you're at is a great starting point.
Great, thank you. I did want to go back personally for me.
Sure.
I loved your analogy with the the purple and the blue pen. It does seem a little silly, but honestly, it is so important to validate these questions that you have. You're spending a lot of time and a lot of energy. You may even ask your customer, do you want a purple pen? And they'll say yes, and then they'll never use it, right?
Exactly.
Those things, you really got to be careful on how you approach the product side of this. So
exactly.
I really love that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because if you ask the customer, do you want it? 9 times out of 10, yeah, sure. But will you use it is the key. And you're exactly right. And we got to figure out, how can we validate that they really will use and buy it? Yes.
Right. And you may even have the purple pen ready to go. And hey, you ask your friend or your family, do you guys like this? Oh yeah, I would totally use it. And you go put it on the shelf and no one no one buys it.
Exactly. Exactly. And instead of thinking that's a failure, that is just like, nope, we need to move on to the next thing. And then what is that next thing? I always
Exactly.
like that from the data perspective.
Right, right. Thank you.
So, oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because it's those simple things that, and as consumers, we are doing that all the time. It's just sometimes when we're now executing this, we forget about those different tools and techniques. So again, I always put my hat back on as a consumer, especially like with my cell phone. If I paid to have this developed, I would have been ripped off because I probably use 5 features and functions the most. So if I would have paid and invested in all of those others, I would have not received my ROI back.
Right.
And that's the same thing we want to do with our products.
Right, exactly.
So here again, where we talk about lean portfolio management, it enables business agility. And business agility is at that system level, that organization level, if you will. So what we always want to do is continuously improve that flow of information and delivering of value. It is so important that we're constantly looking at that. Because again, if we're just doing it at the team level and the product level, that's still, it's good, but it's not what the whole benefit of this agile transformation, digital transformation, whatever you want to call it, it is all about the ability to meet our customers' needs and in a timely manner. So what we want to make sure that we're connecting that strategy to execution by looking at that systems thinking, that whole entire organization. And back to what you were mentioning, you know, like that purple and blue pen. We can invest in this purple pen, but is that the best economic decision? We want to be mindful of that and taking a look at those investment strategies. That's why we want to do, while we do annual planning, we still can chunk it up by quarter so that we can take a look and inspect and adapt. We also want to be, people who know me, I have 2 words that I say all the time. Is it scalable and is it sustainable? Because if it's not, we need to make it that way. We have got to enable organizations to be able to inspect and adapt and change as fast as change happens. So again, that scalable and sustainable is critical. That's why we want to put in some of the, some of the frameworks that assist us with that, because the more alignment we have, the more autonomy we have. So those solutions, when they're scalable and sustainable, allow for a lot of that autonomy down at the team level, which we know is really an important part of agility and so on. And then last but not least, and you've heard me say it over and over and over again, optimizing the flow. We've got to make sure that from business agility, that we are looking at the flow of value, that flow of value to our customers. How fast can we get it into their hands? We want to make sure that when we are getting that customer advocacy and that engagement, that we are, to your point, if I asked you, want a purple pen? Yes. Well, what would you use it? How can we validate that people would really do that? And that's where we bring in the fun, truly. That's where we start to bring in some of that innovation and so on, as really optimizing that and making sure we're working on the right thing at the right time so that our system has a good balance of capacity versus demand. Because again, I've never, and never is a strong word, but I'll say it, I've never worked in that we don't have more work than we can do. And so we want to make sure that we've got that flow of information and that we are able to make those decisions and pivot or persevere when we need to. All right, so that is then how we tie it all back together to the pieces of the puzzle. We want to make sure that we're constantly looking at that portfolio, product, and team, and that bi-directional feedback. Most of the time, we're looking at product and team. And while that's really important, that puzzle to get us all back into the whole big picture of systems thinking requires us to look at that portfolio part too. So that's, again, we've talked about that improving the flow. The term that I use a lot is from concept to cash. From the moment we have an idea at our organization to the moment it's in the hand of the consumer, what is that time and what is that flow and how can we speed that up? Concept to cash. And it can be even from the cost savings or whatever, from the idea of the system, the idea hits our system, to the implementation outside our system. That is what I mean from concept to cash. That's where we bring in all of those different levels. So we have shorter planning horizons, we fund things in chunks and so on to allow for that. We then want to continue to be laser focused on removing waste. Again, I continue to mention time to market because things have changed. We've got to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our customer, and we want to validate that we are working on the right thing at the right time and that it's built right. Because we may need to tweak a couple of things out in production that we didn't think about. And it's not until we get it in the hands of our users, our customers, that we're aware of that. And that again is another time sometimes where leadership is like, well, no matter what, we're going to do it this way. And while that's an approach, we want to embrace that, hey, the customers are not using the system the way we thought, or we thought we had this really good design on our user interface, and we're finding out that people are abandoning it because it's too confusing on something. Those are the things that we want to take advantage of in removing waste and increasing that time to market to touch it, feel it, see it. We want to measure that value and inspect and adapt. Measuring value is very different than measuring team productivity. That's where, again, those objectives and key results can really assist us. There's also evidence-based management. That is a really cool way of taking a look at many different components of what is our current value compared to our new value, or new value, old value. Evidence-based management is a whole training class, if you will. You can find it on scrum.org. They've got a whole guidebook and so on. Really cool. This is another area that will continue to evolve, is measuring value so that we can inspect and adapt. Highly, highly recommend getting into that space, because that's, again, connecting those dots between portfolio and product. We want to validate our investments, continuously follow the money, continuously follow, did we get the expected results that we wanted? Are they saving the money? Are we making the money? What is the evidence and the data telling us about our investments? Because we only have a finite amount of money, of time, and people, and we want to make sure that we're using that correctly. And then, as we kind of started out even talking about operations, don't forget about operations. That again is at that portfolio level where we're looking at the whole thing from strategy to operations to governance. Optimizing our operations is critical. This also then puts us more into that product mindset as we move from more project to product mindset, and then really making sure that we've got that right balance, like someone mentioned about what are we spending on capital new functions compared to running the business or keeping the lights on. We want to make sure that that is not reversed in spending. Any questions?
We had one quick question, and it was just a little confusion on point number 2. Was there a typo on instead of increase, decrease time to market?
Oh yes, thank you.
I think you said decrease, but we weren't too sure. So thank you.
You passed the test. Thank you. That is funny. See? That is exactly why we have to get it in the hands of our users.
Right.
I looked at that over and over again, and my mind saw decrease.
Right.
Thank
you. When you're reading in, you're talking about it, and then you're typing something else, or totally confuses you. So thank you.
Thank you guys. That is funny. That is, oh my goodness, that is funny. But that is I can't stress that enough. Get it in the hands of somebody else, making sure that they really have that second set of eyes on it. So isn't that funny? Thank you for that call out. I will make sure to fix that, because I can imagine everyone's like, what? Increase time to market? No, we don't want to do that. So thank you for that call out. So that's all that I have on behalf of the puzzles and lean portfolio management and so on. But I really would, as you can tell, my passion, this is where companies need to get. It's not a matter of if they need lean portfolio management, it's when they need it. And when we're on the journey of agility and we're doing all of these different things, bringing in lean portfolio management can leapfrog us into really getting the really capturing the benefits of why we started the journey of more of the agility journey, if you will. So with that, Jordan, I will pass it to you for our what's next and the learning continues.
Sure. Actually, before we go into that, we did have another question from Rico. What is the role of technology in the concept to cash process? And how can we leverage technology to optimize our process and improve efficiency?
Great point. That picture back where I had all of the roles of who is at that portfolio level, technology is a business partner there, in which we are looking at our strategic initiatives. We're looking at our business processes and how technology can complement that. So we are partners from the beginning, looking at ways for efficiency and effectiveness. Sometimes technology is not the answer. Majority of the time it is, but that technology is a partner at that portfolio and product and team level. So we want that role to be very collaborative. And then again, we want to make sure that we're validating any experiments. If we think that technology is going to work, we want to validate that. Or it might be just a business process that we need to change. But they need to be from the very beginning partnered together, because most, I would say 99% of our companies now have technology as a key enabler for doing business. So we want to make sure that that partnership is starting from the very beginning.
Great. Thank you so much.
You bet. Thanks for the great questions and for my catching on that word. That is funny.
Absolutely. That's why we're here, right?
Yes, yes.
Cool. So I did want to plug in our next talk. This was a really awesome talk, Chris. Thank you so much for coming up here and putting this all together. I really appreciate it. And this drives right into our next talk. This month, our theme is Agile. So every talk has some variation. We dig into it a little bit deeper each week. So next week, we actually have a talk about bridging culture divides by Cheryl and Sear. It's on Wednesday, March 22nd, and it's the same time from 12 to 1. I'm going to post the details in our chat right now. Feel free to register. And again, thank you everyone for joining this call on this wonderful Wednesday. We really appreciate it. And Chris, thank you so much for your wonderful talk.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. And everyone, have a great day. Thank you so much.
Yes. Take care. Thanks again for joining.